said something very interesting that I read, which was, since you are a working archaeologist, and so you said that when people dig up things together, they then don't destroy them for each other. If you are countries that are working together on, because you respect what each other has done and the depth of the civilizations that you come from. So it's only if you don't know, or if you willingly don't know, that you will destroy other people's things?
Well, first of all, I would say it is really, and I was 30 years working as an archaeologist in the field, in Turkey, 20 years almost, in Siberia, in Russia, in Mongolia, in Uzbekistan, in Iran. And it's something very special, because this always has been cooperation. So with specialists from archaeologists to students and workmen from the village, from these countries, you are working together. And you are working together in reconstruction history, not history of, in Iran, of Iranians or German, that is not the point, but history of man.
So I have a mixed feeling, of course, about colonialism, about being a refugee, about being Chinese. And I think when you go about doing your work on refugees, I am really fascinated by that, because you're dealing with the sense of loss and that sense of not belonging and not being able to place yourself. And I'm interested in that because, in a way, you aren't a refugee. You are so well known, and your cause is so well known, that if anything were to happen to you, everybody would pay attention.
For me, it's a study, it's a learning. I spent quite long time in China, so for global politics, I'm still very new, and I know very little. That's why I forced myself to study the refugee case, and emotionally, I'm of course very attached to the subject. But also, I want to learn what happened to people who being pushed out, not just in Middle East, but also in Asia, in Bangladesh, Myanmar, and also in some other nations like Mexico or other locations, how they survive.
In this kind of situation, do you think art, culture, music, all the things that Germany is so well known for and which is loved here, does that help?
And we have on the Museum Island, we have a project since already 3 years. It's called Multaka. Multaka is Arabic and means meeting place. And we are training refugees from Syria and Iraq to become museum guides on the Museum Island. And this training has 3 different elements. One element is the Museum of Islamic Art, which is in the Pergamon Museum. So this is their own art and culture. And this is, of course, even more important when you are by force abroad, your own culture. And then there is a second block, which is in the Bode Museum. This is Christian art from the late antiquity to the 18th century. So they are also trained for this. And the third block is the German Historical Museum, especially with their main focus on German art, German history or European history in the 20th century, with these destructions and complete defeat, also even moral defeat of Germany in 1945. And for them, it's very interesting. So they see parallels, they compare. And at the beginning, this was also surprising when they saw our objects in the Museum of Islamic Art. The first reaction was, how did this come here? Why do you have it? The second was, it's good that you have it. If it would have remained in Syria, perhaps it would be destroyed now. And then after some weeks in the training program, they said, well, it's good that these things are here, because here on the Museum Island, for example, you can see Islamic art in the context of world art and world culture, from the old antiquity, from Byzantine, from European art. So you can compare, and you see all these arts are in a way influenced each other. These histories are entangled. There is no isolated history, especially in the old world. Yeah. And well, I think the destructions, which we all know, which happened in Syria and Iraq, and especially in Palmyra, I mean, they selected buildings not because they have been the nicest and the best preserved ones, but also because the buildings, the temples, they reflect tolerance, because there have been temples, Roman temples in antiquity, then they've been transferred into churches and later into mosques. So it shows, and also the inscriptions, the reliefs, they show that people from different worlds and countries and cultures and religions peacefully live together in Palmyra, because Palmyra, at the very end, it's one of the ends of the Silk Road. Therefore, it's very important really to say that ISIS should not have the last word.
Yeah.
I mean, we had the same experience here in Germany in the Nazi period, the so-called degenerated art. Only the National Gallery in Berlin, which belonged to my organization, lost 400 works which have been burned. Paintings, drawings, 400, because it was so-called degenerated art. So the Nazis destroy also the identity and the collective memory of the people. And we should not permit that a collective memory of people is destroyed.
That collective memory is something that you bring out in your art always, I think.
I think the progress or making of art is really mostly for me is the discovery. It's trying to find out what happened in the past and how people handling certain materials, certain techniques, and what kind of language and what kind of idea it carries, and but how to transform it into contemporary my time, my surroundings, or what.
And one thing that really strikes me about contemporary life is that our conversation that we have with each other, the shared public collective conversation, has somewhat broken down. And part of the reason for that is the way in which media has been fragmented somewhat. And so just a question about how art can open up new channels and can engage in this new form of communication that is particularly distinctive of contemporary life.
I think very often we think art is I think art is only the vehicle. It's an intention which to create this kind of channels. And when those channels being created, then we can call it art. But there's no such art can solve the problem. Art is about raising those questions and discover those possibilities. So that's why we still think art are so important in modern days or modern thinking, because I think you have to have art to create or art type of thinking to create a new form. This is in every sense, in political sense, even in scientific discoveries. You always need unique thinking, which is beyond the just rational or logic.
Weiwei, you've come to Germany at the most interesting of times, to say the very least. When we're talking about refugees coming to Germany, and the language narrative is one of a refugee crisis, which I don't think is the way to describe it. I think once again it's a crisis of identity in Germany. So Germans are forced to come in to answer the question, what is our identity? And I was wondering, knowing the importance of art in any national identity, I was wondering if you could respond to how art can respond to this issue at the moment with the immigration issue, in helping to reconstitute that national identity, and how your foundation, for example, could sort of restructure German identity and let it be more reflective of the diversity of people that have come to Germany.
I think one basic problem is that Germany, or that the Germans, did not consider themselves as an immigration country. Of course, we had immigrations continuously. There was this so-called Gastarbeiter phenomena, so the people from Southern Europe in the 60s. Then there was a second wave after the South Europeans, the Turks from Turkey. Many workmen came in. And in a way, it was never very easy, but in a way they understood. But they never understood themselves as an immigration country. And I think we have, you know, that maybe that there is now this discussion about by the permanent government to make an immigration law. I think this is very necessary, and to explain to people, not only say we have now an immigration law. This was also the problem with the refugee crisis. You have to explain to people. I do not think that all these people who vote AfD and so on, they all are bad people, but you have to take fear from them. You have to explain them what happens, and we are not alone in this world, and we cannot isolate ourselves and just close the borders. And this plurality is also an enrichment. And we have also, as another argument, we have also a responsibility towards the world. I mean, in the colonial period, for centuries, the Europeans exploited the rest of the world. And I mean, this had consequences still today. And the world is complicated, but the people are intelligent. Explain them. And I think this is the role, in the future role of museums and many other institutions, to explain this complexity.
I totally agree, and I think the problem is we don't understand ourselves. You know, if we talk about Europe, we have to think about the colonial time, why Europe become Europe, and also if we talk about refugees, yes, Germany has 1.2 million, maybe 1.3 million refugees, but Turkey take 3 million already. I mean, Bangladesh. A location maybe a little bit bigger than the park here. Take another million there. I mean, and if you talk about Jordan and you know all those places, they have a lot of refugees there. They have a very limited resource. They maybe 2% of the world growth, the nation. Take 90% of refugees, and this is the refugees come to Europe is very, very small, but creates such a problem, and it shows the short-sighted of our whole education system. You know, we don't see that as a great opportunity. You know, if we and not to even to mention Europe are responsible for so many refugees. You know, and those nations selling those weapons to, let's say, all those unstable nations, huge, French and England still refuse to stop selling weapons to Saudis. I mean, this is clearly, U.S. have more than 100 billion business with Saudis. And we all know how Saudi is dealing with human rights and how they treat, journalists and how brutally that political situation can be. But everybody knows, but nobody really wants to openly talk about it.
Thank you, Weiwei. Thank you, Hermann Parzinger, for the conversation that we've had.